So this is the kitchen that we are going to make over, and this is a veneer kitchen. So a veneer kitchen is like a really thin piece of decorative wood on top of another material. So in this case there's MDF in underneath, and then there's a thin veneer on top. If you are painting a veneer kitchen, or even a wood kitchen, or a laminate cut kitchen, all the steps are pretty much the same. Just make sure you always do the scratch test after your prepping and priming stage, which is one of the most important steps in any project. So I'm going to share with you what a scratch test is, exactly what to do, on how to prep this kitchen, some problems I encountered, how to fix them, some tips and tricks along the way as well. The plan is to go white up on top, just to kind of open up the space a little bit, to make it look a little bit bigger. And then on the bottom cabinets, we're going to go a nice teal green. We actually picked out a kind of like an emerald green colour, but with the terracotta tiles on the floor, it kind of made it look a little bit mossy. So a teal green is what we ended up with. And so we're going to go dark on the bottom cabinets, because that's where the kitchen gets most wear and tear, and then light on the top. So here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove all the doors off the kitchen, and this makes it easier to paint everything once you can get everything off, and also to paint the surround bits of the cabinets. I'm going to also take off the drawer fronts. Just make sure that you're numbering everything, that you have a system so you know what door goes back on what space. So either you can do post-it notes, or you can just get a little pencil and draw the number on each back of the doors. To prep the top cabinets, we're going to do a deep clean first. So the top cabinets are in really, really good condition. There's no damage to them. So it's just a straightforward clean. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to firstly remove the hardware. So I always suggest that you go in with a handheld screwdriver when you're trying to take off any screws. Because sometimes if you're working with like an old piece of furniture or an old kitchen and you go in an electric one, you can risk eroding the heads of the screws away. So you just make sure that you do it by hand, just to avoid that problem. Then I'm going to remove the plate, and I'm going to go in with a multi-tool and gently pry off the plate. So there's two little nails at either end of the plate, so I'm just going to pop those out and gently remove it so that I don't damage the wood in underneath. And if you want to keep these, just make sure you put them in a safe place. To clean the top of the cabinets, I'm going to spray sugar soap all over the surface, and I'm going to leave it sit for about 30 seconds to a minute, and that's to make sure that it breaks down all the dirt and grime that's on cabinet doors. So just to show you here, like, it's a good spray of the cleaner that you leave rest for 30 seconds to a minute, and then you come in with a lightly dampened cloth, and the lightly dampened cloth part is to remove any residue that the sugar soap that may leave behind. So it's important not to go in with a wet cloth, because we don't want to be adding too much moisture into the wood grain. So especially if it was like a real wood, so this is veneer, but if it was real wood, you don't want to be adding in too much moisture into the grain, because you can risk the wood swelling, it splitting and it cracking. So a lightly dampened cloth is the only thing really to remove the residue that the sugar soap might leave behind. A medium sanding block is perfect for prepping the surface. So medium sanding block is about a 120 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to go into all the details and the grooves and the edges with the sanding block, and then I can do the rest of the flat surfaces with a sander. And I do this because if I went into these areas with an electric sander, I could risk like losing some of the detail and eroding away some of the areas that I might want to sand away, because I'll be using the electric sander. So you're better off going to do the smaller little details with a sanding sponge. And you can also do the whole thing like this if you wanted to, if you didn't have an electric sander, but obviously it's going to take a little bit more time and a little bit more elbow grease. So when you're sanding, always make sure as well that you're sanding with the grain. That's to minimise any damage that you might do with scratches from going against the grain. But with a laminate, it's not going to really make much of a difference, because it's not real timber that you're sanding. When I'm using an electric sander, I prefer to use an orbital sander, just because it's lightweight. It's easy to maneuver and use, and even though it's going in a circular motion, I always still go with the grain, again to minimise any damage that I might do. So what sanding really does is it cuts tiny little holes into our surface area, and then when we prime, it's creating the perfect like bonding surface for the primer to really stick onto our wood, and this will increase the durability. Again, I'm going to do the back of the door as well. So all the doors are going to be primed and painted at the back, so I need to prep them in the exact same way. And then we need to remove all the dust from the surface. So the best way to do this is with your little brush attachment on your hoover, and you go over the whole surface area with the little brush attachment and get rid of the majority of the dust, so all the dust that you can see. So make sure that you do this on the front and on the back of each cabinet door. So after you've that done, you also have to make sure that you're removing any of the dust on the surface that you're working on. So if you're going to be painting on this surface, you also need to remove any dust that's on it. A common mistake as well at this stage is that people will go in with a damp cloth to remove the last bit of dust. So just remember that we don't want to add any moisture into the wood. So I'm going to go in with a tack cloth. So a tack cloth is a cloth that's designed to remove the last little bits of dust and debris that might be on any surface that you're painting. So usually there's a little bit of beeswax in the cloth, and what that does is it picks up that last little bit of dust that might remain on the surface. So you'll be surprised how much dust comes off this, and when you pick up the cloth, like, it's great to see all those little bits that you would have missed if you didn't use this cloth. So you just rub down the whole surface area with the cloth, so the doors, the front and the back, and again the surface as well that you're working on. When you have the doors off and you need to paint them, it's good to elevate the door. So you can use like tins of beans. I have 2 tiles in underneath this just to raise it a little bit, and that makes it easier to paint the edges and the rim around the door, and stops like the door sticking to the surface or anything like that. So it just makes the job a lot easier. I'm going in with the Fast Flow Quick Dry primer and undercoat to prime the top doors. I'm going in with a white base. So this is a water-based paint. It's you've got the benefit of it being a primer and giving nice coverage with the undercoat, especially when you're painting with white. So make sure that you're getting a painting stick and that you are mixing the paint thoroughly, so that you're getting right down in the end and that you're mixing it really, really well. So this is water-based paint. It's low VOC. It's better for the environment, and it's better for your health as well. So it's nice and easy to work with and clean up afterwards. I'm going to do with a sash brush, and I really like this brush because it's nice and light to hold, and it really gets into all those detailed areas parts. So I would get all the detailed areas first, and then I would get the rest of it with a roller. So not too much paint on your brush. You should never have, like, your paintbrush should never be dripping with paint, and if it is, you probably have too much on. So a little goes a long way. So just make sure that you don't overload your brush with paint. And as you can see here, the primer and the undercoat gives like really, really good coverage, and that's what you really want. So that will like minimize how many layers of paint that you need to put on it. So it's really important that you get a good primer and undercoat. The brush with the pointed tip as well is really, really good to get into those groove areas, especially that very thin line. It kind of sits in there like better than a normal kind of flat brush. So I really recommend the sash brush. It also like flies along the edges as well, especially with that your little the tiles that I have in underneath and the elevator a little bit makes all of this a lot easier than if it was flat on the surface. So it's great just to kind of hugs around the corners of the doors, which is brilliant, and it just makes your job a lot easier and faster. So once you have all those awkward areas done, you can go in with your roller now and finish off the rest. So this is the method that I would use for every piece that I would be painting. Awkward areas first, and then getting a roller for the larger areas. So I'm going to go in with a microfiber roller and load it up with paint. Not too much paint, but enough paint just to cover the surface. So Here we're really concentrating on just getting your first layer on. You're not trying to block in every single area. There's going to be areas that are going to be a little bit sparser than others, and that's okay because you'll get those on the second coat. So it's kind of important not to overpaint all the time and try and block it all in. So just with your first coat, you're just kind of trying to get as much coverage as you can, but don't overpaint it. With the rollers as well, don't lean too heavily on them. Like a nice kind of light feathery motion with your roller, so that you're not creating like indents of lines from where your roller has last rolled. So go nice. You don't have to put too much pressure on your roller when you're rolling. Also, like any of these brush marks that we can see, and even the after effect of the roller going on, that will, when that dries, it kind of self levels more. So you're not going to be left with what you can see here. It'll all dry out levelly, and that's just using a good quality paint and good quality tools. So once it's fully dry, you need to do a scratch test. So you're literally trying to scrape off that primer layer with your nail, and if it doesn't come off, it's all good. If it does come off, there's something wrong. Maybe it wasn't cleaned properly or wasn't sanded properly, but now is the time to test it before you go any further. So now I'm going to share how to prepare the bottom cabinets for a deeper colour. So usually the bottom cabinets of a kitchen are a lot dirtier than the top parts. So I'm going to show you how to clean, give it like a really deep clean with a different product than sugar soap. So the first thing we need to do is to remove the hardware from the drawers or the doors. So again, just with a handheld screwdriver, just to make it easier and that they won't erode any screws, just to pop it out, and then we'll flip it over and take off that plate. So again, I'm going to go under the multi-tool and gently pry off the plate. So because these were bottom drawers as well, so there's a lot of dirt and grime on these, and you can get it off with sugar soap, but it might take a little bit longer than normal. So I would use another product called Crud Cutter. So it's really works deep into dirt and grime a lot quicker than sugar soap would. But sugar soap will still work. It just might need to clean it like maybe 2 or 3 times to get the same effect. If you have sensitive skin, I'd always suggest that you wear gloves when you're using any chemicals like this. So I'm going to go in with a sponge that has a little abrasive pad on it, and that's just to help this whole process. So it's really important to clean this dirt and grime off, because if you don't do it properly, it kind of acts like a barrier for your paint and your primer, so that it won't stick on it correctly, and then that can lead to scratching and stuff. So make sure that you give it a really good clean down. There's some kind of really dirty and grimy areas in the corner sections as well, so I'm just going to show you the best way to remove that. So I sprayed in the Crud Cutter, I let it sit for a minute or two, and then I came in with a scrubbing brush. So you want a brush that's not too hard that it's going to damage your wood, but that it's going to work your area as well. So like a nail brush is perfect for, it's kind of soft enough to get into all those kind of nitty gritty areas that are kind of hard to get into, to make sure that you've cleaned really well. And remember just not to forget the back of the doors as well. So just make sure that you give them a really good clean, and then you can go in with a lightly dampened cloth again and remove any residue. And just to quickly go over this again, you're going into all the awkward areas with a sanding sponge, a 120 grit. So all the edges and the awkward areas, and then the more flatter surfaces you're going in with your sander. Then after you have sanded everything, you're going to pop in with your hoover with the brush to remove any of the large dust areas, and then you're coming in with your tack cloth to remove the last little bits of dust and debris from your surface before painting. I'm going to go in with a dark grey primer and undercoat, because my colour is very deep. So if I went from a white to that green colour, it would take a lot of coats, whereas this way I'm kind of saving on how many coats of paint that I will need on my top coat. Again, I painted all the awkward areas with the sash brush, and then I went over the rest of it with a roller, and then the scratch test then to make sure that your primer is not coming off before you put your paint on. So this was one of the doors that was on one of the end cabinets, and as you can see here, there's some damage. So this is a veneer kitchen, and the layer of wood has come off the top, and then you're left with the MDF underneath. So when I'm cleaning, I don't want to clean here, because if any moisture gets into this MDF timber, it's going to swell, and so I'm trying to avoid that. So the best way to do this now is to fill it with filler, but we need a different filler than your normal wood filler. So I'm going in with this wood filler. So it's a tougher wood filler than your normal one, and it's 2 parts, so you mix it. So there's a little tin that comes on the top, and you mix it with some of the filler and some of the hardener. Depends on how much you mix, you just follow the instructions. So this makes it really, really tough and strong, and it dries in about 30 minutes, but after about 20 minutes you can kind of manipulate it a little bit. So I need to get some of those grooves back into the door, and I do not have a router or anything like that, but I'm going to show you a little trick that I use to get some of those details back. So you just make sure that it's mixed really, really well, and you've a little bit of time to work with it before it hardens. So I'm going to, with the little spatula that comes with the little kit, I'm going to fill in as much as I can that area where the MDF is exposed. So after I have it all filled, I'm going to skim it off on the top with that little spatula again, and that's just to try and minimize any work that I have to do afterwards, like sanding and stuff. So I'm just trying to get it as smooth as possible. So I'm going to come back after 20 minutes and do my little bit of extra work to get it in the best shape I can. So I went in with a little lino cutter. You can get these in any art supply shop. They're about €5. Most schools would have them. And I cut back in the details of the little grooves, just so when it's painted it'll mask it a good bit, but I just wanted to make sure that I could get it as close as I could. So then I just went in with a 120 sandpaper just to smoothen it all out, and I can go back in and work it. After I have the layer of primer on as well, I can take another look at it and see, do I need any more filling areas. Sometimes usually when you prime something, all those kind of areas show up better that you need to fill. So I went in with some sanding paper then afterwards to try and smoothen out that little line that I cut with the lino cutter, and smoothen out all the edges. So once we have the doors off, we can then really work on the rest of the kitchen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray sugar soap in absolutely everywhere. Leave the sugar soap sit for about 30 seconds to a minute to break down any dirt and grime, and then we can wipe it off with a lightly dampened cloth. So if you have sensitive skin, always make sure that you're wearing gloves, because there is chemicals in sugar soap. So then we go back in and we wipe down the whole surface area and get rid of any dirt and grime that might be left on the surface. So once that's dry, I'm going to go in with a little sanding sponge to sand the rest of the kitchen cabinets. Always make sure you're wearing a mask when you're sanding. And then I'm going to, again, hoover off all the dust with my little hoover attachment. And then I'm going to go in and take off the last little bit of dust with the tack cloth. Then to prime the rest of the kitchen cabinets, I'm going to go in again with the sash brush and the primer, the fast flow quick dry primer and undercoat, and get those last little bits. So I'll work here with the sash brush and with a roller. So the sash brush works on the small little detailed areas and the roller on the larger ones. So this little combination works really well. So awkward areas first, and then you finish off the rest of it with a roller. Sometimes with the panels, like on the back of this little shelf, they were quite deep, so I wanted to get them in with a brush first and all those awkward areas, and then pop in with the roller after. I always tend as well to leave the primer dry for 24 hours before I put paint on, and that's just to make sure that I can do the scratch test properly. I also would leave any like filling in or anything like that, if there's any gaps or anything, until after this part as well, because once you prime, it really shows up any areas that need extra attention. And I'm going to show you how to do that in the next video, with how to paint the kitchen and some finishing touches as well, like adding handles as well. So make sure that you catch that video.